Okay, we're talking contagion. This is really the worry. Is obviously we knew that Genesis was going to go down for a while, but it's really a question of like, well, who are they going to take with them? Um, who else do you think is vulnerable? I know that we're just speculating, but
Many of the financial services providers, the virtual currency exchanges, the custodians have arguably either been operating outside of the law or under a regulatory regime that's not best suited to protect investors. And while it's hard to predict what will happen going forward and who else might have exposure, what we will see is that the implementation of the federal securities laws and the trading of digital asset securities through ATSs and exchanges will help eliminate any of the issues that we've had previously because there'll be systems in place to prevent excessive risk and to ensure that there's proper enforcement under the SEC.
okay. Well, let me make a bad pun here. Is the genesis of this whole situation the Terra Luna collapse? Because it really seemed like that was the starting point of all of these different bankruptcies.
Yeah, I think you could say that. What we saw was that there was a lot of interconnection between the major players in the space. And when one of the dominoes fell, it had the effect of knocking out a lot of other players as an ancillary effect. Obviously, Terra Luna was a major debacle, and there was potential issues with algorithmic stablecoins. That's a completely separate issue here. But I think what also sort of compounded that effect was what happened with Three Arrows Capital, which I believe that either the Digital Currency Group or Genesis had exposure to, and then that was further compounded by their exposure to FTX. And how many major hits can you take before there's not enough funds to go around?
Look, I agree 100%. I will say it's interesting, right? Because Terra Luna was sort of the first, I don't know, first ball to drop or whatever. But really, what it did was it exposed the danger of the ecosystem sort of underneath, right? Like I did an episode on the danger of oligopolies in the space. It was one of the first thing I noticed how everything is so interconnected, right? Do you see the danger of that and how concerned investors are about the infrastructure?
There's definitely a risk because when you have financial intermediaries being trading venues, custodians, offering some sort of banking activity, when one of those activities goes awry, it has a sort of a contagion effect there. And I think what we're going to see is as intermediaries are properly registered under the securities laws, that those activities will be properly segregated and boxed off to potentially eliminate any contagion effect.
Well, let me ask you another question, right? Like, are we being unfair by criticizing crypto so vehemently? Because if you think about 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis, one of the big revelations was the TradFi, the traditional finance system, is just as sort of like interconnected, right? It's really like one big domino falls, everything else goes down.
People are quick to criticize new things, particularly new things that have both created a lot of wealth and destroyed a lot of wealth. But in comparison to the financial crisis of 2008, there hasn't been a bailout. And what we've seen is that capitalism is working properly, and that companies that took excessive risks and that were operating in ways they shouldn't are failing. And I think that overall, the current crypto financial services infrastructure will either have to evolve or die. And in that sense, they'll either have to properly register under the securities laws and achieve compliance or fall by the wayside of history.
Okay, but Genesis and DCG, as I understand it, I mean, they're like good players from a regulatory standpoint, right? Like they're the TradFi component of the ecosystem.
Um, Genesis and Gemini have a potential enforcement action from the SEC that they offered an unregistered security with their earned product.
Right.
It's not my place to comment whether they're a good player or a bad player,
Mm.
but essentially what we're seeing is that uh, there's potential enforcement action and potential exposure that they have as a result of the allegation that they offered an unregistered security. So we'll see how that plays out. But at least what we've seen historically is that the SEC has a very good record when it brings enforcement actions against the crypto space.